So in our previous chapter 10, we covered the velar stems, and the example we used was sarx. And then we were introduced to one kind of dental stem nouns, and that's what we call the mat stems, which were mostly neuter. So we had anima, which means name, but we also had pneuma, and soma as examples of a particular kind of dental stem noun, the mat stem, because each of these nouns, soma, pneuma, and anima, has mat in its genitive singular stem, from which the rest of the noun forms are derived. In chapters 11 and 12, we're also introduced to another kind of dental, and these dentals are feminine nouns. And so a good example of this is the important word charis, which is the word for grace or gift in Greek. And since it's a feminine noun, it does not use the neuter endings as the mat stems do, but it'll use the masculine feminine third declension endings. So let's review what those are. For the nominal singular, it's sigma, then it's os, e, a or nu, s, own, sin, and os. And remember that even though the lexical form for this word is charis, the genitive singular form is where we find the stem. So in the genitive singular, we see that the stem for charis is harit, and therefore it ends, in fact, with a dental consonant, as we expect. And so the form for the genitive singular, if we add os to it, is haritas. And the dative singular would be hariti. The accusative singular actually has two forms. The more common, harita, and also you will see the form harin. And actually, I'm sorry, it's harin that's more common, but we do see the form harita, and that's the form for grace in the accusative singular. We also have harites, haritone, and when we add a sigma to a tau, remember the tau drops off, so this form is harisin or si, and the plural form in the accusative is haritas. So if we were to say the forms, it's haris, haritas, hariti, harita or harin, harites, haritone, harisin, and haritas. And then here's another example of a feminine dental where the stem is not ending with the letter tau, but with the delta. And so this is the elpis is the word for hope in Greek. And so we add a sigma to the delta drops, and we get the form elpis. And then we add the third declension feminine endings to the stem elpid with the delta, and the genitive singular is therefore elpidos. The dative singular is elpidi. The accusative singular is elpida, and this is the only form with an alpha. The nominative plural is elpides. The accusative plural, the genitive plural is elpidon. The dative plural is elpid. Now remember the tau drops, and so therefore what we expect is the form elpisi or sin, and then the plural form in the accusative is elpidos. And those are the forms for a different class of dental nouns that are feminine. For our next two paradigms, we have a dental noun that's not, it's not a mat stem like onema, pneuma, or soma, but they are dental stems, and these dental stems, which are neuter in its endings, tend to sometimes have an irregular, unexpected nominative singular form. But let's go over the neuter endings for the third declension noun. And so the case endings are, if you remember, nothing, os, e, nothing, alpha, own, see or sin, and alpha. And again, it's the genitive singular that tells us the stem. And so for the word phos, the nominative singular, which is the word for light in Greek, its stem, as we see in the genitive singular, is phot with a tau. And if you add nothing to it, you wouldn't expect the tau to turn to a sigma, but in fact it does, and that's why sometimes the nominative singular forms do carry something unusual and unexpected. But for the rest of the forms, when we add the neuter case endings, the form of the noun will be something that we should expect. So add os to the stem phot, and you get photos for the genitive singular, photi for the dative singular, and because the nominative and accusative forms are the same, we have, and for the neuter nouns, we have phos for the accusative singular. For the nominative plural forms, we have phot, ta, phota. For the genitive forms, we have photon. And for the dative forms, remembering that the tau would drop, dentals drop before sigma, we have phosin or phosi. And then the accusative plural forms would be phota. So again, except for the nominative singular, and because the accusative singular are exactly the same for the neuter forms, the rest of the forms are something we would anticipate, given that the stem is phot, but the nominative singular form is phos, and that's something simply you would have to memorize as part of your vocabulary. So let's say the forms for the word light, phos, in Greek, starting with the nominative singular. It's phos, photos, photi, phos, phota, photon, phosin, phota. Let's look at another example. We also have another example of the dental stem, which are neuter nouns, but they're not the same as the mat stem, with the word hudor, which means water in Greek. And though exactly, not quite a transliteration, the Latin hydro is in fact where we get, it is in fact based on the Greek word hudor, which means water. Now the stem for hudor, again, it's in the genitive, and it's hudot, and hudor simply reflects an irregular nominative singular neuter stem, a neuter form, case ending, that you simply have to memorize as part of your lexical and vocabulary. So if the nominative singular is hudor, but the genitive has the stem hudot, you add os to it, and the genitive singular is hudatos. The dative singular is hudati, and the accusative singular, which is always based on the nominative singular, they're exactly the same with the neuter nouns. It's hudor, and that's your accusative singular. The nominative plural is hudata. The dative plural is hudaton, or sorry, the genitive plural. The genitive plural is hudaton. The dative plural is hudasin, or si. That's the dative plural. And the accusative plural, same as the nominative plural, is hudata. This next paradigm is something that you have not seen before. It's called a consonantal or a semi-vowel class. And we're going to go over one of the semi-vowels, which is the consonantal iota. The consonantal iota. There's also consonantal digamma, which is part of the semi-vowels that we'll introduce later for another chapter. But the consonantal iota, it's symbolized by the iota, but with a little diacritical mark on top. And what happens is that this letter that is used in classical Greek but not Koine Greek does form the root or the stem for a certain class of nouns, but we never see the consonantal iota ever spelled out in Greek. Instead, the consonantal iota, when the noun appears in a particular case ending, will either turn into a regular iota or an epsilon. It turns either to a regular iota or epsilon. So if the word pistis, for example, in the nominative singular, means faith, its stem will either be pisti with a iota or piste. Its original stem is pist with the consonantal iota over it, but then this consonantal iota never appears when you write out the actual uses of the noun. It either turns into a regular iota or an epsilon. And you might be wondering, well, when do I know when the consonant iota turns into a regular iota or epsilon? And what I've done is I've shaded the case endings, the nominative singular and the accusative singular. These are the times when the stem is pisti with the iota, and the other case endings, the genitive singular, dative singular, and the nominative through genitive, dative, accusative, plural forms all use the epsilon as part of its stem. And then pistis happens to be a feminine noun, so it uses the article he. And so if we use the case endings for the feminine noun, again we have sigma, os, e, alpha, or nu. But in this case, for the semi-vowels, it almost always wants to use the nu as its ending. And then the plural forms are s, on, si or sin, and os. So let's see what this looks like. So the nominative singular form is you add sigma to pisti and you get the form pistis. And when you add piste for the genitive form plus os, the genitive form doesn't like the fact that you have two short vowels together. So what happens is this omicron goes long in its final form, and the genitive stem is pisteos. So that's not a typographical error. It is an omega, not an omicron, as part of the genitive stem. So pisteos is a genitive stem. For the dative singular, it uses piste as the stem, add the iota to it, and becomes piste. And then the accusative singular uses pisti as the stem and add the nu to it, and it's piston. So the forms are pistis, pisteos, piste, piston. What about the nominative plurals? Well, here you have piste plus as a stem plus s. But when the two epsilons are next to each other, they combine to form the diphthong a. So the actual form for the nominative plural is pistes with a diphthong epsilon iota. The two short vowels combine to give you this diphthong, and the final form for the nominative plural is pistes. The genitive form takes the stem piste, and then you add on to it for pisteon. The dative plural adds piste plus si or sin, and is pistesen. And then we also get another change in the vowels because we have piste as the stem plus os, and alpha here is short. Combine that with epsilon and you get the epsilon iota diphthong again, although it's a different way. Here, for the nominative plural, you get the form because you're adding s to it. But for the accusative plural, you get the form because you're adding os to it. So you get to the same final form, but it's through a different path. And the accusative plural is pistes. Let's say the whole entire paragraph beginning with the nominative singular. So let's read this together. 1, 2, 3. Pistis, pisteos, piste, pistin, pistes, pisteon, pistesen, pistes.